Yeah. Alan Alda working the room.
Working the room, yeah. Oh, were we on already?
Yeah,
when I did that?
we're on.
I thought that was beforehand.
No, we got a chance to see the Joe Tynan act where you go through and work everybody.
Hand. I didn't shake everybody's hand, but they look like they'll vote for me anyway.
They will vote for you. They will vote for you. So great to have you here, and what a kind of fun time this is for you. You're getting
to be here with you.
Yeah, to be here with me. Can you imagine? You've made it so far now. Things are finally going your way.
I know, thank God. I've dreamt about this. I was a little boy, 9 years old.
Well, one of us has been dreaming about this since they were 9. I'm not sure which one,
Yeah.
but it's so much fun, everything that you're doing now with Stony Brook. And it seems like you've been working. Well, how long now have you been involved in scientific stuff?
Well, a long time. I think I started doing science programs on PBS almost 20 years ago. I can't really remember.
And still that same passion is still there today.
Oh, yeah, more so. I mean, in the course of that, of doing those science shows, like Scientific American Frontiers and 2 or 3 other series we did, I've got an understanding of how I could get the scientists to be more personal and more direct and clear about what they had to say by making personal contact with them. You know, I'd really make them talk to me and explain to me what they were talking about, and to drop the jargon so I could understand it. I was sincere about that too. I didn't know more than I pretended to, or I didn't know less than I can't remember. I got into that sentence and got in trouble.
Yeah, right.
But I didn't try to be dumber than I was, and I didn't try to be smarter than I was. I tried that second one for a while, and that really didn't work. It's no good to pretend you know what you're talking about. If you're interviewing somebody,
sure.
You must have found this too.
Yeah.
Because you can box somebody in with a question that doesn't really relate to what they know or what they do, and then they have to like squirm out of your question because they don't want to be impolite. So I would start out from not knowing anything, which is pretty much where I was, and then they would have to really make it clear to me. And then I realized that if they didn't have somebody like that to talk to, they would go on probably lecturing. They'd go into lecture mode when they talk to an audience or when they wrote an article. So what could we do to help them be more personal, the way they were when somebody sincerely wanted to understand them? And then I realized that I could. There were things I knew about communication that I could pass on to them if they were willing to get in the same room with me. For instance, improvising. What I learned as an improviser, and I don't mean comic improvising. I mean the kind of improvising that Viola Spolin, like 60 or 70 years ago, invented, which are very rule-based and lead to connection between the players, which then turns out sometimes to be funny because it just makes you giggle when you see people connect.
Right.
And I experimented with some scientists, young scientists, and it really did help them connect with the audience that they wanted to talk to. And then we could apply some of those same things to teaching writing. They learned the writing skills better once they had done the improvising. So it was a whole set of realizations and epiphanies we had that there was something that we could do to help them be more communicative, and they love it. They really, and we've seen unbelievable transformations.
Well, we have a couple that are really good
Yeah.
at it today. Bob Green is fantastic. Neil deGrasse Tyson is very comfortable with it. And you can see that these guys actually get fans, you know, and that's, I think, where you want to get them to, where people can say, I want to follow their work from this point on.
You want to hear what they have to say if you can understand it. But it's not only the public, you know. The public, first of all, has to support science if science is going to get funded, because they'll complain to their representatives. But when scientists go to the representatives in Congress and try to explain the science, it's unbelievable how many members of Congress have said they can't understand the scientists. And why would they give money to people who are doing work they don't understand?
Right.
Well, they've tried that. They kind of do that all the time.
Right.
And it doesn't really work, you know?
Well, the media also will run back and forth and, bring up some research thing that they don't understand and make fun of it. And that sets
there
science
was
back.
Was it Senator Proxmire years ago, a couple of decades ago, used to have the Golden Fleecing Award. And he would find some obscure study on like how bad is mouse breath or something like that. You know?
Yeah, right.
And he would say, "Isn't that stupid? They're studying mouse breath," and denigrate all of science. When in fact, that mouse breath study might have been very important on the road to curing cancer or who knows what. But he would find something that sounded stupid and give it an award, which was, I always thought, kind of anti-intellectual. I didn't know why he did it, because he seemed to be a smart guy.
Well, anti-intellectual, I think, helps politicians. I'm a regular guy. I'm more like
That's
you.
True. Yeah, I
not
think
like
you're right.
these eggheads.
Yeah.
And it seems to help them get over. So you want to bring science to a place where the American public can understand it.
Yeah, and you know what we find, that it helps with the public. It helps with people who are setting policy and giving grants for them to understand it better. And it helps scientists communicate with one another. Because interestingly, if a scientist is not in your exact field, and maybe even in your own laboratory, but is separated by some intellectual distance from you, you might not understand each other very well. The same word is used by two different scientists to mean different things sometimes. And this is all for a good reason, you know. I mean, you don't want scientists to stop using technical terms when they're doing their science, because it's more efficient and it's more accurate. But you can still be accurate and clear when you're talking to people who don't speak your language. And if scientists can understand one another across disciplines, they can collaborate better. And more new things are happening, really valuable things are coming around, because two different disciplines that never got together before are now suddenly able to get together. And they can get together more quickly and better if they can be clear with one another. Clear and vivid is all we're trying to do, not to dumb it down and make it oversimplified. You know, I remember Einstein is supposed to have said, a thing should be as simple as possible, but no simpler.
No simpler. Well, and I guess since the internet, they're all able to read each other's work in real time and work together, where if you think of Einstein, if he wanted to talk to somebody else, he probably had to get on a boat to go and do it, you know?
Yeah, I think that's true. Well, they would send letters to each other. It's funny, that period of time when he was doing his breakthrough work, for 5 or 10 years in there, really seems very vivid to me, because I've read about him. I did a little theater piece about him based on his letters that we did at the World Science Festival a couple of years ago. I think we're going to do it again this year. And I also wrote a play about Marie Curie, and who was alive at the same time. He said about her, there was a time she was involved in a scandal because she was, after her husband was dead, she had an affair with a married man. And that was really, it was okay for him, but not for her.
But not for her, yeah.
But, you know, I mean, then at the time, women just weren't allowed to behave in any way like men or have men's ambition. So Einstein wanted to defend her, and he said to a friend, I don't think she had an affair. She's about as alluring as a herring. It's funny when you see those pictures of him with his shock of white hair. You don't think of him as a ladies' man, but he was. His younger pictures, he looked kind of arrogant about how he thought he could bowl you over with his charm.
Well, and he
did. He had a lot of friends.
Well, he was the alpha dog, I guess, of his time, right?
Yeah,
you know, I mean, if you were going to be with a scientist,
right,
might as well.
So, hey, honey, do you like relativity? Brian Greene with like string theory, he could, if he weren't happily married, he could really do well now.
He does have groupies, I believe.
Yeah, I bet he does.
They follow him around.
Yeah.
And
he's a wonderful guy. I'm very curious, and every time we meet, and we see each other a lot because we work together on the World Science Festival, I always, just out of the blue, ask him some question about something I've just been reading that day. And he stops whatever he's doing and he explains it to me. He loves to explain. That's what I love about scientists. Yeah. They love to help you understand new things. And they don't, they don't speculate with you. They tell you about what seems to be really known. And because they love to teach like that, I want to make it possible for them to make it clear to more of us because they will then have a greater ability to make it clear.
Well, see, I think that's what was great about the shows that you would do is because you would go in there ready to learn, because a lot of men find it difficult to say, geez, slow this down, explain it to me.
Well, yeah, I had to go through a period where I was willing to not know in front of the camera. Mm-hmm. There was a critical moment where I was interviewing Carl Sagan, and I thought the interview went really well. And afterwards, the producer said, "Why don't we have a cup of coffee?" Coffee is a sure. Anybody asks you for a cup of coffee, don't go. He said, I couldn't understand why you wanted to look smart during that interview.
Right.
And my face got red, and my first reaction was to deny, to myself, that, what's he talking about? And then I thought about it, and he was right. I was trying to look smart. And the funny thing is, you get smart by asking questions, not by looking smart.
Yeah.
Even if you know something. And I began to learn more because I would really ask basic questions, and I'd say, it really doesn't make sense. So tell me again. It doesn't match what you just said a minute ago, to my mind. And then they'd have to make the connection for him. Because one of the problems is we often don't make the connections. We're so used to the connections. We say, there's this, and then there's that. And well, how'd you get from this to that? And that's how we can understand it. That's how we can put our fingers on it.
But the thing about it, I think that's so great, is that you show that science is fun, because we didn't grow up that way. We were in school, and they kind of beat our natural curiosity out of us as we, tried to use our memory for different things.
My experience in school, which was probably way earlier than yours, was that questions. You weren't invited to explore a subject. You were asked to remember what they told you.
Yeah.
And I remember one biology class where the teacher said, it's been learned that crying releases certain toxins and it's good for you. So I raised my hand and I innocently said, well, what about laughing? Does that do anything? He said, please, we're serious here.
Yeah, right.
And about 30 years later, they came up with the idea that laughing is good for you.
Sure.
So I hope he rots in hell, that bastard. Only I believed in hell.
Yeah, I was going to say. What a breakthrough. There is no heaven, but there is a hell.
Yeah, right. That would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, right. Did your experience in acting help you in this? Like, do you create the kind of role of an interviewer, though? Or do you...
Oh, not at all. No, no. But my experience in acting, the only thing I ever studied in acting, or the only kind of training I ever had, was in improvisation. And that I use. That, to me, that was one of the most valuable things about learning to act, was learning to improvise. And I use that. I use it in conversation with people because it's basic. It's not making things up. Improvising is not making things up. That's writing. And one of the things you're encouraged not to do when you improvise is to write on your feet, to keep your mind working on stuff inside your head. The main thing about improvising is to get in touch with the other person, observe them carefully, read their face, read their voice, read their state of mind. And that makes things come out of both of you that you didn't know were in there. That's where the unexpected things you both say come from. And that's why it's funny, even if it's not jokey. In fact, it's almost never jokey, but it makes you giggle because you're seeing something real take place.
Right. Which is unusual.
Yeah, it is unusual.
Yeah, particularly on TV.
Yeah.
To see something real.
Or when husbands and wives talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's unusual for them sometimes to listen to each other. Isn't that weird thing of seeing a couple in a restaurant and they go through a whole meal and don't say anything to one another? No. And then more than once, I've seen the woman after about 45 minutes point to the food and say something, and he would go, But at least she was working on it.
Yeah, it was getting it little at a time.
Yeah.
Well, but the fact is, to go back to what was fun about science is about being curious. And most people, I think, as we lose any curiosity or put it behind us, that's when boredom sets in and we think we know it all.
Yeah.
And one of the great things that I see what you do with science is they're not only really excited about some of the really big things, but you could bring almost any problem to solve, and suddenly it's fun for them.
Yeah, I think that's true. And one of the things I would love to see happen is scientists get more communicative. And all of us can get more communicative.
Sure.
It's not me putting myself above them at all. I've gotten better as I've focused on this. One of the things I'd like to see is the public getting an awareness of the way scientists think and to think more like them, to base their ideas, their opinions more on evidence, to question the evidence, question where it came from. I mean, it's habitual with me now when somebody says, taking vitamin L really improves your sex life. And I like to say, where did you read that?
Right.
Was that in Hustler? Because then it would make sense.
Yeah. There's the data that you're looking for. Well, I think what's great, too, is that they can fall in love with not knowing the answer. Where I think the public, most of us, want a quick answer. We're used to quick answers.
Yeah.
And that's why the media will try to give us a quick answer, or politicians will try to give us a...
But to relish uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I think of it as surfing uncertainty. You get by, you don't sink into uncertainty, but you just manage to skid along the top of it and get somewhere. But it's like, I guess it is a little like skimming across the ocean. You don't want to sink in and drown, but you want to get someplace, but you have to recognize the existence of the ocean, and you have to accept it and use it. Uncertainty can get us many, many places. We don't need to get to certainty. We need to get more and more understanding of where we are and what we're involved in. I think that's my view for me. I mean, I can't tell other people what to think. Well, I can, but they don't think that way.
But if you can embrace that, if you can really hold on to that, it can become very enjoyable, not knowing the answer.
It can. It really can. I don't see more enjoyment. I mean, I've had it both ways, and I don't see more enjoyment in believing I know the answer to most things than in knowing I don't know the answer to most things, almost anything, and just trying to find out more about it. It's just fun. It's more playful. It is. People who know the answer to things don't seem as playful as people who. What did I start to say? I got lost in the middle of that. People who seem to know the answer, think they know the answer to it, don't seem as playful as people who don't really know and they just want to fool around and see how far they can get.
And then when it is playful, suddenly it doesn't feel like work anymore.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I think
that's why I would think that education could improve if it got more playful. And then I read this article. Did you read this a couple of weeks ago by, I think, an economist who said we're spending, I got to look it up and find his name. We're spending too much money on education that comes too late, that we should be making sure that babies and early, and young children are spoken to and read to more. And that would develop their brains better. And when they get into school, you don't have to do so much remediation or any.
Well, remember how much when you were a really little kid you were into research. No matter
Yeah,
you go
I
into
was.
that backyard
Yeah.
and everything, caterpillars, ants, all that stuff.
Yeah.
You're curious about the world, and then somehow along the way we start to squeeze it
That
out.
may
of
be
us.
a natural process too. I don't know. I wouldn't want to blame it on education completely, because there are a lot of wonderful teachers, and we've all had one or two teachers at least who opened our minds and our hearts, and who we knew were really worried about and caring about how we were doing, not just intellectually but as people, and they probably teach well, or I felt they taught me well. But there's still something that we could do, I think, to make learning happier and more fun. I see, but my education was my formal education was a long time ago. Since then, I've learned most of what I know from other people and from reading. The actual years I spent in education, they only taught me, I think, two things. One was to think clearly, and the other was to use language. And everything else has kind of been superseded by reality. That, for instance, I remember a geography class in grade school where I had to learn how many tons of coffee Brazil produced that year. I really don't care anymore. And I didn't care then very much either. And it didn't really. What difference does it make? I don't quite get it. Unless you know how many tons were produced by everybody else and what difference it makes to that country and the whole world. They never got into that.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
And of course, like you said, when they're having us memorize whatever about John F. Kennedy or Lincoln, they don't teach us how that person started to think to get to that point.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
I think that's some of the great work that you've done with these scientists is figure out how they get from one point to the next.
I think that's really important. And I want to see science is a great detective story. And when it's presented like a detective story, it's like we were trying to find this out because it was so important, equivalent to who did the murder. Here's where we looked. Didn't work. It was a blind alley. Oh, we felt terrible. We didn't know what to do. Somebody said this, try that. Oh, that didn't seem possible. We tried it. Oh, my God, look what happened. That's fascinating, but you don't get it that way, especially in the more abstruse articles. You get the answer first, and then everything is sort of it's not exciting after that. You're not led to it. But you reminded me of something else, and this is the thing about improvising. If you don't stay in the moment, you can't stay in any other moment. So do go on.
Well,
now you don't even know what to say.
who out of
Maybe
all,
somebody over here. What would you like to know?
I checked with them earlier, and they were just like, I'm not sure. Out of all the people that you met, was there somebody that or studied? Was there
Yes,
somebody?
you.
Just me, yeah. But I mean, I know that you did the work on Feynman and stuff like that.
Oh,
Was
yeah.
he
I never met Feynman, Richard Feynman, the great physicist, but I did a play about him, and I loved playing Feynman. There was one guy I always think of. His name was Vermeer, and I interviewed him on Scientific American Frontiers, and he studied shells, and he was interested not in beautiful shells, but in shells that had a hole almost drilled all the way through them, because that was a turning point in the evolution of that animal's history, because a predator had tried to drill through and suck out the animal under the shell, but the shell was thick in that point, at that part of the shell, and the predator couldn't make it all the way through. So that would have been a turning point. Its progeny would have had shells that were thick there. And he was fascinating about this. The interesting thing about him is that since he was 3 years old, he was blind. And he did all of this work on shells with his fingers. And he'd be talking to him. He'd have his hand in a drawer. And while he's talking, he's fooling with the shells. And he says, oh, I never saw one like that before. Interesting guy.
Yeah. And you'll walk into something like that. by trying not to research it too much.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I tried in the beginning. I tried to read everything I could, and that gave me this false impression that I knew something, and I would start asking questions based on what I thought I knew, and I would really corral them badly, and I could see them squirming. And after the Carl Sagan coffee incident, I tried not to do that, and I became more comfortable and happier. And I learned more. I really learned more because I heard it from them instead of from my misreading of it.
And I think, too, when you look back at your career, the fact that you played George Plimpton, who kind of lived his life as, a participatory journalist, I guess, just leap into things, let himself get turned over a few times until he understood.
Yeah, and it's interesting, even though he participated in the football he reported on with the Detroit Lions or in the New York Philharmonic playing a triangle, he never thought he was a musician or a sports person. He was reporting all the time. He was in there doing it to see what it was like and also to be able to talk to the other people who did it. So while I've made and with the science stuff, I've made a show out of me learning, and I really am in there to learn. That's why I wanted to do it. But it's mainly in the service of helping them express what they've learned about nature through science.
And also helping the people at home learn as you're doing that.
Right. Usually if I get it, then they get it.
Yeah.
Or maybe they get it a step ahead of me, which makes them feel like $1 million.
But also, even if you don't get it, you just go back to that thing of at least I have a really cool question to keep in the back of my head.
Yeah, well, it was rare that we came away without me finally getting some glimmer. Yeah. Because I'll just spend hours of tape. I took Eric Lander, the DNA guy. I grabbed him by both cheeks and shook his head, and I said, "I don't understand what you're talking about." And he's very good-natured, and he backed down a few steps and got me into it.
But, some of the people who do it really well, Feynman is like this. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson and Dr. Green.
Eric Kandel is terrific. But
when they're really explaining it to you, in a lot of ways it feels like philosophy, and it also feels like comedy. It's just laid out in a way that is joyful.
Yeah.
Joyful.
And philosophy is science without the research,
Right.
I mean, it's like, what do you suppose perception is? Well, perception is when a tree sort of gets in your head. Right?
That's true.
And then they start studying the brain and say, no, the tree doesn't go into your head.
Yeah. So philosophy is science, but with wine. You can drink the whole time. You can sit and drink the entire time.
Yeah. And they're starting to get together. There are philosophers who are basing their work, I think, now more on science. Mm-hmm. But they still, I guess, are important to scientists in a way that they can take what's known about science and sort of integrate it into other things that are known and raise other speculative questions. I have the feeling they don't answer questions as speculatively as they used to. Mm-hmm. Because that used to be, unless they had been introduced to the scientific method, all they had to go on was speculation. Aristotle, maybe one of the smartest people alive at his time, he said some very stupid things. He said some things that I think were wonderful about drama. He I think the first one to write about dramatic action. What is at the heart of a play that makes a play work, and it's at the heart of all acting. And in that same essay, the Poetics, he also said a woman is not a fit subject for a play, or a slave.
Or a slave.
Yeah, he just cut out most of humanity.
Yeah, just half.
Yeah, you had to be like a rich guy.
Yeah.
And then, but all of that stuff can change. That everybody should have an opinion. Everybody should express it because it's all on the way to getting somewhere. I think as long as we listen to one another and don't denigrate one another.
And there's never one person that you could say they have it all.
Right.
Someone said to me once, "No one book, no one teacher." And I thought that was perfect.
That's great. People ask me who's my favorite actor. It's the same principle. There are moments, performances, or just moments in performances that I relish on the part of other actors. But no one has been consistently, overwhelmingly terrific. They're entitled to mistakes the same way everybody is.
And Brando couldn't play every part. I mean,
he couldn't play my father's part in Guys and Dolls.
It's amazing.
My father did this Sky Masterson and Guys and Dolls on Broadway. And then Brando was cast for, I guess, understandable reasons. They thought he could do anything, but he couldn't do it as well as my father could. I don't say that because he was my father.
Right.
I say it because he had control over my mind.
No one saw that one coming.
Especially me.
Your father was a fantastic actor, and you...
He was, by the way, there's an example of what I was just saying. He was brilliant as Sky Masterson. Mm-hmm. He was not so good in many other parts. I wouldn't say that in public if he were still alive, but I mean, it is true that he started in burlesque, and he had many traits of the performer and not as many traits of the serious actor. And I think there's a difference. Sure. But he was a great performer, and he had contact with an audience that was so charismatic. They just couldn't take their eyes off him. But he was playing a character in Guys and Dolls where he was a gambler who dressed sharp and was smooth, and he could do that so well. Nobody else could play that part the way he could.
Was it typecasting?
No, he was a very sweet guy.
Yeah.
Very, very gentle, very interesting. It was only later in life, because I had a competitive relationship with him for most of my life. It was later in life that I realized how he really never told me what to do. He was a controlling person, but he would always say, well, Butch, maybe you ought to try this. I don't know, like that. And it was very, very, very forgiving and easy with me. I liked it. I don't know why I was so competitive with him. Well,
is that the reason why you entered the same field, or did you feel competitive once you entered that field?
No, I think I was. Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I can't remember, but I do remember when I got into acting, I deliberately went toward being an eccentric comic rather than a leading man, because he had that sewn up. So I wanted to have my own area.
You were going to go off and find your own spot.
Yeah. And then as I got older, I had to be a leading man because that's what I was the right age for, And so I could accept that and didn't feel like did my own version of it.
You had the opportunity to have him on MASH.
Yeah, twice.
And that was, everybody was watching that on one hand to see the show, but also knowing this is you and your dad together.
Yeah, and the first show was written by someone else. The second time I wrote the show and based it on our relationship at the time, and it was in a loving way. And he was so generous, he didn't mind, because I based it on the idea that I painted his character as a very controlling guy. He would say, well, why are you eating the sandwich that way? And that would drive Hawkeye crazy. So all during the show, they have this repartee going where they're getting on each other's nerves. And then this was very interesting. He read the script, or he heard my idea for the script, and he said, I have an idea. How about this? They're at an aid station, and there's an explosion, and each one is wounded. And he says, my right arm is wounded and your left arm is wounded, and we have to operate together, each using the other hand. I said, yeah, thanks. And I thought, what a stupid idea that is. What a Tin Pan Alley idea. He's going back to burlesque. And then I said, the hell with it. Give him that. It's probably a good idea. Well, it was a terrific idea. And when we did it, this amazing, magical thing happened. While we were doing it, we were, as you said, we weren't just these two characters. We were father and son. and we were collaborating, each one the hand of the other. And it wasn't just the fake operation on the patient. We were getting through the scene together. We were as close as you can be. Our hands were cooperating with each other. And it became a very important moment that I remember with my father. And partly because I didn't make myself superior to him and think he has an idea less valuable than mine would be. And I began to realize he had a terrific idea, and he gave us a moment as a father and son we might never have had.
That's fantastic.
That'll be $50 for that story. I mean, you realize how valuable these stories are?
These are, yeah. Everyone's going to leave here just a better person. Just everyone's going to call home. Dad?
You're not as stupid as I thought.
That is really one of the first signs of maturity, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah.
When you finally see that guy who you either idolized or were angry with, whatever it has, as being a guy. You know?
A person who makes mistakes the way you do, and you can sometimes be helpful, sometimes you can give advice, sometimes you can still listen to advice, sometimes you just trade ideas or let each other be, not even have to have an effect on the other person. When you can do that with a parent or a friend or the taxi driver, then it's pretty good.
You know, you made me think, too, when you said about writing those, you wrote so much for MASH. When you got that show and became a big hit, most actors would have just thought, this is great, I'm going to ride this out. But you used that time to start writing and directing and adding responsibilities.
Well, I had always wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer when I was 8 years old. And it wasn't until much later in life, when I was 9, that I wanted to be an actor. And my father took me out on stage with him at the Hollywood Canteen, where we'd entertain sailors and soldiers. This was during World War II. And we would do Abbott and Costello routines, and I was Costello. And that was the first time I was on stage in front of a crowd. And it was amazing to me when I got the first laugh that I realized I had power over 1,000 people who carried guns. It was really a terrific feeling. I wandered off into a side alley just now again. I forget what we were talking. You mentioned something that was interesting.
Yeah, the fact that you used that time to become a writer and director.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was about me.
Yeah.
I knew I recognized the topic. I always wanted to be a writer. That was what I wanted to be first. You know, and I began directing movies when I was 11 years old. I had a little wind-up Bell and Howell movie camera, and I would edit. I think I even edited them in those days. But I would make up stories, and I had a horse, and I think I held somebody up. I was on my horse, and they were in a car, because I didn't have two horses. So I had a little story. So I always wanted to do those things, and I was able to improve myself in those jobs while I was on MASH.
And knowing that this is going to lead to the next step for you, I mean, was that it, or was it just about doing each MASH episode on its own? I mean,
it was just trying to get better. That's all. That's all it was. I wasn't trying to, advance a career or anything. I don't understand actors or people in the arts who have a 5-year plan. I don't think you can. Do you?
No, I can't. I would like to.
This is this uncertainty thing we were talking about. I mean, especially for artists or people in the arts, you don't know what's going to come around the corner. You don't know if you're going to get a drought or a feast or the locusts will hit. Usually it's the locusts.
It's the locusts, but you just got to play it no matter what. When the locusts hit, you got to go, how do I make this work?
Tonight for dinner, we're having locusts.
We're having locusts, yeah. When you would write and direct, it always would be about human stories, though. You were never an action guy. And I talked to Cal Burnett not too long ago about how much I love the movie.
Did you talk about me?
Yes, I did. I talked about 4 seasons.
Oh, you did?
And what a
I was kidding.
fantastic film that was. And she said it was one of the best experiences she ever had.
Oh, that's nice. We had a wonderful time making that because Carol and I were friends, and a couple of other people in the movie were friends with me, and we all became friends. We had 3 weeks of rehearsal, most of which we devoted to becoming friends. And I said on the first day, we have to be friends by the time we shoot this movie because that's going to show on screen, and it's all about friendship. So everybody, it was so funny. Everybody immediately started telling bathroom stories about themselves. It was kind of on a mad quest to be personal and reveal themselves to one another. But it did break the ice.
Yeah.
I thought I would tell you one now. But never mind.
Well, I always loved that film because of the fact that, you can see that film when you're 20, it might mean one thing to you, but as you get your 40s and older,
Yeah.
You can see that if there's any kind of problem in the village, it affects everybody.
Yeah, that's true. And it's funny about that movie. I wrote it to a great extent from personal experience. There was a friend who got a divorce, and he didn't tell me he was going to get a divorce, and I was mad at him for not telling me. It was none of my business,
right.
But that's a big element in the movie, and yet, although I was really very careful about how I structured it, and I was working very hard on it, I didn't really understand what it meant. Well, or at least what it meant to me, until it was all done and shot, and I had to go around the country being interviewed about it. And then I suddenly realized what the movie was about. That, to me, at that time, it was about how you make friends with people, and you go through, I remember now how I used to say it, you meet them in the springtime, and everything is blooming and beautiful, and then it's summer. And in the white heat of the summer, in the glow of the sun, you start to see them for what they really are. And then in the fall, the leaves fall away, and you start to see really who they are. And then in the winter, you have to make a decision. Am I going to stick with these people forever, or am I going to ditch them? And it's funny. Somebody stopped me on the street the other day and said, this is like 30 years later, said, there's a line in Four Seasons that's kept me going, where Carol Burnett says to my character, I don't want to die without friends. So she's urging me to make peace with our friends and stick together with them. And I came home and told Arlene about it. I'm so glad I wrote that line in that movie because this woman said that to me. And Arlene said, I gave you that line. Screw her, you know?
Yeah. Well, somebody had to get it out there.
Yeah, somebody had to put it. Let her get a deal with a movie company.
Right. Who knows if Paul Revere, came up with his line, but he had to get it out.
Your company was said by somebody else?
Somebody else.
Oh, my God.
Here you go. Here's your line. Tell everybody. He's going over. Should it be the British are coming?
Oh, the burgers are coming.
The burgers are coming.
Who ordered the burgers?
Another thing that I think that is such a natural place for you is when you work with Woody Allen.
Yeah.
The Woody Allen films that you've done are some of my favorite work.
That one I was lucky to be in. I love the three I was in very much. But the Crimes and Misdemeanors, I think, is his best movie, and one of the best movies ever made by our country. It's such a serious and movie, and the fun, the humorous stuff is very human, not jokey, and I really love it for those two reasons.
Well, you also get one of the great show business lines of,
yeah.
If it bends, it's so funny. And I've heard
if it breaks, it's not.
If it's not. Yeah. If it bends, it's funny. If it breaks, it's not. But I've heard people try to explain that type of thing when they're talking about
now, you started as a comedian, right?
Yeah, I started as...
Because you haven't been that funny today.
No, today... This is... Eventually, if you're not funny enough, they sit you down. You don't stand up anymore.
Oh, right.
Just sit down, talk.
Standing, you're funnier.
Standing. If we were standing, I'd be killing this room.
So when as a comedian, now I brought that up because you started as a comedian. You said something about so did you find that it was true? If it bends, it's funny. If it breaks, it's not.
Well, I think what happens is when people try to explain what they want you to do with your act, they do this in radio and they'll go, go up to the line but not over, and you're like, does that mean anything?
Yeah.
You know,
How do you know when you're over the line?
Yeah, you don't know when you're. But they feel like their job is done.
Yeah, right.
You know? And
I was one night co-hosting the Oscars with Jane Fonda and Robin Williams, and Robin Williams, you know, is just like plugged in to someplace in outer space. And he would come off stage and he'd say to me in the wings, what do you think? Is this tasteless if I say this? And he'd say something utterly tasteless. And I say, yeah, that's tasteless. And he'd go out and say it. So I don't know where he got his, I mean, they kept it in the show and everything. So apparently he could get away with it. But how do you know where the line is? If you listen to some inner voice, how do you know who's speaking?
it's exactly true. And I love that thing of what you and Woody had in that film. I mean, talk about a controlling person.
Oh, yeah,
it
right,
was fantastic.
right. Yeah, trying to control his own biographical film.
Yeah, that's right. Such good work. Is there a film for you that you're like, this is my favorite, or you like them all on different?
No, I don't. I don't think about it. I think I had the most fun of the pictures I wrote and directed. The one I had the most fun making was Four Seasons.
No,
and it was the most personal one I did. And my wife was writing a book about it at the time, and she's a photographer, and we used her pictures in the movie because one of the characters is a photographer, and the pictures were kind of funny, and the photographer was a kind of obsessive person. So in the rolling credits at the end, when it would say photos by Arlene Alda, there'd be like a gasp in the audience. They thought I was making fun of my wife.
Yeah, right.
But it was she was good-natured to make the pictures for the character.
Yeah.
You know?
Because the character does get attacked kind of for taking the
for those weird vegetables flying in the air. You know? But that was the most fun for me. But it's interesting. Even the one where I had the least fun, I learned a lot of stuff, and that's ultimately the best if you learn. I think for me anyway.
But does it feel like that when you're directing the film and you're kind of lost from it? It's got to be.
Does it feel like what?
It's got to be a scary situation. Or you feel like at least I'm learning as I'm going along through.
I don't remember ever being scared directing because I'm sort of arrogant.
Yeah, that helps, doesn't it?
It helps a lot. Yeah. You know? No, I'm not, I don't think I'm really arrogant, but I do put myself in the position a lot. You didn't ask me about this, but I'm going to tell you about this great thing about myself. I put myself in the position of not knowing if I'm going to be able to accomplish this thing. So I do, in a way, scare myself like that. I give talks at places where I have no business going, and it's momentarily scary. I mean, and then there's this tremendous sense of achievement if I can get away with it, or actually deliver the goods.
But heading there, when you're driving there,
sometimes my heart's racing.
Like, how do I get out of this?
Yeah, I once was giving a talk at the Grand Rounds session of the Psychiatric Institute at Cornell. Please. What am I going to say to 100 psychiatrists? So I decided to talk about what I knew about, which was fame, and because I didn't think they would know an awful lot about that, but there's some connections because in fame, people think they know who you are, and in the psychiatric situation, there's transference where they have a connection to who they think you are, who you aren't necessarily. It happens on both sides.
Sure.
So I'm going to talk about fame, right? So I'm in the taxi cab, and we have to go to York Avenue or someplace, and I'm trying to remember what I'm going to say, and the cab driver has this radio program in Russian blaring from the radio, and then he's on the telephone yelling in Russian. And then he takes a wrong turn and starts taking me downtown. And I'm saying, would you first of all get off the phone because it's against the law and you're making me late? He says, I can't get off the phone. I'm on the radio. He was calling into this call-in Russian radio program, complaining about something and driving me all over New York. So I'm trying to get to this appointment where I'm supposed to talk about fame to psychiatrists while he's having his 15 minutes.
Fame is a very strange thing. I mean, it's particularly now. Don't you think almost everyone wants to be famous, or even the 15 minutes?
They do. You know what always shocks me is when, and I know some rich people, really rich people, and they also want to be famous, and they do things to get famous. Why would you, if you have money, if you can be rich without being famous, take it.
Right.
I mean, that's ideal because it takes time and effort and money to be famous, and you don't really. Maybe you get a table in a restaurant, and then the service is bad because then they're busy thinking about what do you really like.
What are you really doing?
Yeah.
But you did aim towards fame. As
I didn't aim toward it. I aimed toward trying to be a good actor, and then I got into this thing that made me more famous.
And you couldn't have gotten more famous than what you eventually got. I mean, you were on a TV show that the last night of that show, the last night of MASH, the country absolutely sat down and just watched.
Half the country watched at the same time. That was amazing.
125 million people.
Something like that. Yeah. I don't think anybody really knows because in many places they were watching in large groups. In at least one town, they took over the town hall. And like half the town came in and watched it. So if they had a Nielsen box on their TV set, they thought one or two people were watching.
Right.
There were hundreds. But it was like 105, 110, I don't know, a million. And it was amazing. It was an amazing experience driving in the streets because we saw it on a big screen at the 20th Century Fox studio. And then we all went out to dinner together. And as we were driving, that's when the show was actually on the air. And I suddenly said to the people in the car, look at this. The streets are empty. They must be watching the show. Because at that time of night, the streets were often clogged. So it was a strange experience. We really didn't understand how much we had penetrated into the culture while we were making it. We never got that until it was over.
And nothing like that will ever happen again because there's too many TV stations.
Too many stations. The audience is, as they say, fragmented. But I always thought our audience was fragmented to start with.
Right. That is true. Everybody watched that show for different reasons.
Yeah, they did.
I
had mothers come up to me and say, oh, I just want you to know my son watched your show and became a doctor. Then the next one would come up and say, well, my son watched your show and joined the Army. I said, did he watch the whole show?
Well, a lot of times people say, like, you'll see the list of greatest sitcoms, and they'll put that in them like a sitcom.
I know. I
They're
hate that word. I
operating.
always hated the word. I would never call it that. First of all, it's even a misnomer for sitcoms because they usually don't have a situation anymore. There used to be an interesting, funny situation to get the characters into, and they'd have to get out. Now it's mainly people standing up insulting each other. And then they sit on the couch. The couch is always in the same place. Do you notice that? And behind them is a staircase going up. Archie Bunker lives.
Yeah, it's the same set.
Yeah, same set. Something's a little more upscale, a little more downscale. I think Frasier had a little step up to the dining level. But he was a professor, so that's
sure. That was considered a leap ahead.
Yeah,
You know?
right.
It's amazing how they changed television. Well, the science stuff that you're doing now, and I do think it all ties back in together. For when I read some of the stories that you've written, that it always comes back to being curious about the way the world works. You got into acting because you're curious about the way people work. Is there anything that you didn't get the chance to do that you wish you would have had the opportunity to do?
I don't think so. I think most of the things there were a couple of movies that I was asked to do that I couldn't do that I thought later that would have been good to be in. I would have learned a lot and I would have gotten better. But I don't really regret anything. I regret little personal things. Every once in a while, I'll be driving in the car, and my wife will see me wince. I'll go like this. She'll say, "What? What?" I say, "No, that's 20 years ago." Something I said, I would have said something to offend somebody, or it would have been stupid about something and thoughtless. And you know how they say your life passes in front of you just before you're going to die? Mine happens. That happens to me every day. I'm constantly, and it's not real regret. It's just a cringe.
Yeah. You need an editor. You need to sit there.
It. Maybe I should smoke something.
Well, this is the right place for that. I have to tell you, it's we started this talking about the work, but for anyone listening, I think the real important story here that Alan is teaching us is how to live a life.
Oh,
and
I wouldn't dare to teach you that.
Hey,
but thank you for saying that.
You're doing it, my friend. Alan Alda, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. You're terrific.
Alan Alda.